Palestine Terminology 101. These are the words you should be using when discussing Palestine and Palestinians. Since the settler colony of Israel was established in 1948, they've been using the power of language and words to control our narrative and establish their false legitimacy to the world. On top of Western media constantly portraying us as the villain and blatantly displaying their bias. Now it's time for us to fight back and reclaim our narrative, sharing our truth in the same way through the power of language and words. The biggest thing you need to learn from this video is that there needs to be a collective shift of perspective on what Israel is. Defining Israel as a concept. We have to shift from viewing this as Israel as a country versus Palestine as a country to viewing it as a settler colony called Israel occupying the country of Palestine. This is colonizer versus colonized or colonizee. Same way white Europeans landed in North America and decided to claim the land as their own, despite the native population, white Europeans landed in Palestine and decided to claim it as their own, despite the indigenous Palestinian population. Remember, settler colony, country. Colonizer, colonized. So starting with the first word, Israel. When describing what it is, don't say country, say settler colony. Even when using its name, don't just say Israel. Say settler colony of Israel. Or if you're writing it out, put it in quotes. By calling it just straight up Israel, we're legitimizing the idea that they have the right to establish a colony on top of an existing country. But it's also the only thing that the world knows it as. So this is a little difficult, but it's kind of like best practices type thing. Now to describe the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis are colonizers. Palestinians are the colonized. You can also say occupier, but occupier doesn't really acknowledge the tactic in which they established this false colony. So colonizer is a little bit more accurate. All Israeli cities should be referred to as settlements, Zionist settlements, Israeli settlements. Instead of Israeli citizens or civilians, it should be settlers, Zionist settlers, Israeli settlers. Their military, called IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, should be called IOF, Israeli Occupation Forces. When describing the Palestinians, we say indigenous, native, the indigenous population, the native people of the land. Now to describe Palestine, that is a country. The country of Palestine. Prior to 1948, it was a fully functioning country with its own economy, its own population, and it just so happened that the Zionists established this settler colony on top of that country. The UN does not recognize Palestine as a country any longer, but for us, it still exists, and we're simply living under occupation, living under colonization. This one we cleared up a couple years ago during the Sheikh Jarrah social media boom. We don't say the Palestine-Israel conflict, Palestine-Israel war. It's the Israeli colonization of Palestine, Israeli occupation of Palestine. We have to actively reject the word conflict and war. Anytime we hear that, we should be correcting the person and saying, it's not a conflict or a war, it's colonization, it's an occupation. War insinuates that this is country to country, and again, that's not the case. Also, using war makes it seem like it's a one-time event, like what's happening in Gaza right now. Like a Gaza-Israel war started 11 days ago, when the issue goes far back, more than 75 years ago, when Israel was established as a settler colony. Which brings us to the topic of Gaza. So during times like right now, when Israel is bombing Gaza, and remember, this is nothing new. Every year, Israel carpet bombs Gaza for a given period of time. So during those periods of bombings, do not refer to it as a war, we call it a genocide. So don't say Israel-Gaza war, it's genocide of Gaza. And this isn't an exaggeration or trying to be dramatic, it's an actual genocide. Gaza is not a country on its own, it does not have a formal military, and all 2.1 million people are living under Israeli military blockade. They can't leave, so they're literally just sitting there waiting to get killed. Often killed in the hundreds, if not thousands, which is a genocide. Oftentimes we hear people describe Gaza as an open-air prison, when a more accurate description is concentration camp or extermination camp. Prison insinuates that it's a population of criminals living there. The difference between extermination and concentration is based on timing. So just in general,